Okay, let's dive in. So, welcome to the Guitar Music Theory podcast, Agent Envy, aka Alejandra.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is really awesome.
So, Alejandra, we met in a very interesting way. You are an artist, you've got quite a social media presence. You had posted a video where you recommended my book, Fretboard Theory, and it went viral. Um, and people reached out to me saying, "Hey, have you seen this video? This woman's talking about your book," and I thought that was really neat. And I reached out to you and learned more about what you do, and we got connected. And I thought, "Oh my gosh, you would be a great." Guest here for the podcast. I want to talk more about that video, that story. But before we do, why don't you introduce yourself, tell people who you are and what you do?
Awesome. And yeah, thanks again for inviting me. It was very serendipitous, I suppose. But I am an independent artist. I go by the artist name Agent Envy. But like you said, my name in the real world is Alejandra. I would say that my genre is kind of best described as like 90s alternative slash trip hop, leaning a little bit into the industrial slash metal. There's a lot of slashes in in there. But overall it's kind of in that sort of general 90s area. Um, and I have been releasing music since 2020, but I've been involved in music since as far as I can remember, singing my entire life. I did a lot of musical theater up until I was about 18, and then kind of discovered the concept of like being in a band. I had always listened to rock music growing up, but it wasn't until I was in high school that I had the opportunity to like start singing rock music, and that's when I started realizing, okay, I think this is what I really want to do. So kind of kept it as like a hobby off and on, and then in 2019 I really made the decision like I want to try and seriously pursue this. So I've been kind of on my professional music journey ever since.
All right, so that's really cool, and we heard some of your music here. I used it at the as the introduction of the podcast. Your song "Hospital Socks,"
Yeah.
and that's available along with other songs on Spotify and Apple Music. And I'm going to promote your website and everything. What's your main domain?
It's agentenvy.co. There's no M, so just .co. But I'm on all social medias as agent.envy. So it should be easy to find me.
Well, so I pulled up your profile here on TikTok. You have a pretty good uh, good following, and you kind of post a variety of things. You post some of your music. There's some performances on here. You talk about setting up your studio. You recommend guitar books and just talk a little bit about your learning process. You even had some lessons on here and stuff. I'm gonna just play one of these videos. Let's listen to a little bit.
They say freak when you're singled out. The red, well, it filters through. So let me down. The thread is real. When hit the side goes red again. Seeing red again. Seeing red again.
Cool. That was a neat guitar sound there too. I like that.
Yeah, I think there was probably some sort of chorus number of effects, like a little bit of a phaser effect on there as well. So that video is part of kind of like a running series that I accidentally stumbled into on my TikTok, where I kind of take requests for 90s rock songs, 90s and early 2000s rock songs. So that's a song by Chevelle called The Red. And yeah, I just, every once in a while we'll kind of post something. And I think it's a great way to attract the sort of audience that I'm looking for, which, like I mentioned, since my music is so 90s inspired, it's if I can single out people that are interested in that type of music, then I have a feeling that they'll enjoy my music as well.
Well, that's a very smart move there. If there's any other musicians that are listening that are trying to figure out how you kind of build a following and
Right.
create content, it's like there's a lot that you can do, and
Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the challenges of being on social media these days is that you can really do anything. And uh, the trick is to not get pigeonholed into a niche that you're not looking to be in, right? So right now I'm actually trying to transition eventually into promoting more of my own original music, which back in 2020 I had been doing when I was releasing a bunch of songs, and now we're actually gearing up to release an EP at some point this year. So my content will start to transfer over to be a little more focused on that. But the way that I kind of view social media is almost like a blog, or kind of like a journal for what I'm actually doing at any given point in time. And then I'll do the covers, or I'll share a little bit of what I'm working on, so that it's not just kind of like a video diary or anything. But I try to, balance it between here's a little bit of behind the scenes, here's me talking about, you know, something interesting that I've learned. And that's kind of how we got to where we are right now, right? Is I had been getting back into really seriously practicing guitar. And I've always really thought of myself as a vocalist first. I've been singing for as long as I can remember. And I started kind of messing around with the guitar in like middle school. But I never really got it. I felt like I was just kind of, I could play songs, but I wasn't very confident playing songs. And I think that being a singer, like a born singer, kind of ruined that for me in some ways, because I was like, well, why would I work so hard to try and play guitar if I can just sing it and it will come out exactly the way that I want it to? But over time, I sort of got sick of not feeling, as confident in my guitar playing. So in 2019, when I decided I was going to seriously pursue music, I was also working full time and traveling for work probably close to 50% of the year. And I was like getting really frustrated because I had all of this time on planes and things like that where I was just sitting there. But of course I didn't have a guitar with me, but I had this desire to like rapidly improve my guitar playing. So the way that I found your book is that I was researching, like, is there a way to practice guitar without having a guitar, with you? And that's kind of how it came up, is that somebody recommended, I think on Reddit, your book, and said that it completely changed the way that they thought about the guitar. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll check it out.
We're talking about Fretboard Theory,
Yes,
the
exactly.
Red Book, which is available on Amazon.
And I highly recommend it. And so I thought that, I wanted to share that experience with my TikTok following as well, because it was such a game changer for me. And, I've been going back through it in the couple of weeks leading up to our conversation. And even now, it's just like, it's so like, it's crafted in this way that I feel like there were so many aha moments that I, for whatever reason, was not exposed to in my many years, kind of like messing around with the guitar. And I thought, other people could benefit from it. I know a lot of people kind of struggle with guitar plateaus, or maybe feel a little bit directionless. And so I wanted to share that with people. And apparently a lot of people kind of resonated with that sentiment, because the video has like almost 1 million views now.
Let's pull that video up. Here it is so far. As we're talking right now, it's up to 955,000 views. So yeah, it is almost to 1 million views. And let me play it here.
Okay, so if you play the guitar, you're trying to learn how to play the guitar, I want to tell you about a resource that completely changed my understanding of this instrument. So for a really long time, I felt like I was just kind of memorizing chords and memorizing songs, scale patterns, but nothing was really clicking. Like I didn't feel like I was as comfortable navigating the fretboard as I wanted to. So I ended up finding this book called Fretboard Theory by Desi Cerna. And right off the bat, he explains that the reason for that is because music theory is usually geared towards pianos, which are very linear instruments. You know, there's only one note, in a given octave on one spot on the piano. And on the guitar, it happens in multiple places. So it's already not going to compute. When I tell you that every single chapter of this book completely blew my mind, like I am not exaggerating. For example, he goes over something called the cage system, which I had never heard of. And it breaks down like how to play any chord from any root note anywhere on the guitar. And there's just so much awesome knowledge in that book. And it's very, very understandably explained. I highly recommend that you pick up a copy. If you're interested, I can break down some of the stuff that I learned here, but go check it out. You will not regret it.
Awesome. And who would have thought that video of all of your videos suddenly kind of went viral? I mean, it's really even kind of perplexing to me. Of course, you know, I have an online business. I don't really advertise, so I really rely on people finding me organically, you know, my podcast or a YouTube video or a blog post or something. And there's a lot of word of mouth. And so, you know, people are you mentioned that someone had recommended the book on Reddit, but I don't know that I've ever had a video like this that got this many views. So why do you think that people suddenly became so interested in this and this video blew up for you?
I don't know. TikTok is a very odd beast. You know, it's very difficult to predict which of your videos is going to get swept up by the algorithm and get attention. But I think that, I mean, if we're going to dive into kind of social media theory, part of what I did was I started with like a sort of call to like an audience identifying thing, right? If you play the guitar, you're trying to learn how to play the guitar. And so right off the bat, people who fit into that category were like, that's me. I'm going to watch this video. Plus, if you see the video, you know, I have my guitar, I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of gear. So that may kind of add to the interest there. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of people really resonated with my experience, which was that like I have been playing the guitar, quote unquote, for a long time, but never really felt like I understood what I was doing. And I'm still very much on that journey. And so I got tons and tons of comments that were like, this is exactly how I feel. I'm going to check out this book right now. You know, I did get some comments that were like, you didn't tell us anything. And I'm like, well, you have to get the book. Like, I'm not going to teach you how to play the guitar in this 1-minute video. But, you know, that's kind of social media for you. So there's always going to be some, a little bit of negativity to deal with. But the majority of the people that saw that video, you know, were driven to go check this book out. And I still get comments saying, you know, I got this book because of your recommendation and I'm learning how to play the pentatonic scale now. And I just think that is so cool. Like, I don't know, I feel like there is so much gatekeeping in the guitar community. And it's just unnecessary. Like, if you truly love to play this instrument or you truly love music, why wouldn't you want to share that knowledge and those resources with other people? So that's kind of the attitude that I take. And I'm happy that it got that much attention because it means that a lot more people are kind of getting over that plateau, that it can, you know, it can be difficult to overcome, especially if you can't afford lessons or you don't know anyone else in your circle that plays guitar. Like, it can be very difficult to kind of get out of your rut if you don't have a direction to go in. And I think that's kind of like what happened to me with your book, is that the first time I was reading it and you had this diagram where you were lining up like the cage system, pentatonic, and arpeggios. I think it's in like maybe the chapter 3 or something like that. And I think I like started jumping up and down and screaming when I saw that, because I was like, okay, I know that there's obviously a reason why these patterns exist and why you have to, like that there's structure to the guitar, but it had never been lined up for me in a way that everything was stacked up against each other. And this may be like an incredibly basic concept, right? But I had never been exposed to it. And I think that's what's important, right? Is that you have to know what your learning style is. And one, I'm a very like kind of classic. I like to read. I read books. I take notes, that sort of thing. That's the learning style that works for me. And then I go and apply it on the guitar. And so, whether or not it was that my previous instruction lacked that particular concept or that it just didn't click with me, doesn't matter. What matters is that like I eventually got it, and this is the resource that worked for me. So of course I want to share that with people.
Yeah, well, I think what you were experiencing is the reason why I wrote the book. You can go study like traditional formal music theory, and it has its place, and it can be useful and interesting. But as guitar players, we ultimately have to apply things to the fretboard, and the fretboard is essentially a grid. So we're dealing with shapes and patterns. Well, and that's not usually how things are taught. I remember taking a music theory course in high school, and everything was explained using a music staff and a piano. But in order to understand how that actually gets applied to the guitar, it took me a while to figure out how does this translate into what I'm physically doing on the fretboard and how I visualize the fretboard, because that really wasn't part of the instruction that I received. You can learn about scales or what a scale looks like in a staff, or you can learn about how chords are played in the piano, but there's additional information you need to understand how that actually applies to the guitar. And I think a lot of guitar players, unfortunately, have a negative attitude about music theory. They think maybe it's not so useful because they fail to make that connection. And I taught guitar lessons for years. And of course, most of my students just wanted to learn songs. And they would just memorize it and you would tab it out, which in my book is okay. Like, that's a great way to get started. It's a great way to learn. And I don't think you have to like start out learning how to read music or take a formal approach. I usually don't even recommend it. I tell people just learn some songs, learn how to strum some simple familiar songs, learn how to get the skills together. And once you can play, like, then you can start to learn more about music, so you can progress, get better, you can understand more of what you're doing, you can start applying things. So fretboard theory, I mean, it was called that because it was basically my quest to figure out how can we learn theory on the fretboard in a manner that makes sense to guitar players. Because my students over the years didn't really want to learn how to read music. They weren't really interested in traditional theory as would typically be explained with someone sitting down at a piano. Again, not that doesn't have its place or couldn't be valuable or interesting to someone. And of course, all of my students were listening to rock music. They loved, I mean, no matter if they were, 13 or they were 83, they would say, I want to learn the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and the Eagles and Eric Clapton. And even today, if I meet a young guitar player, if they really get bitten by the guitar bug and they're really into it, I'll say, well, what kind of music are you listening to? They will name artists from decades ago, because there was kind of a golden era there that really became really popular. And when you study traditional theory, well, it's all traditional music as well. So this book was kind of born out of that. I'm like, you know what? Guitar players want to understand music. They want to get better on the guitar, but they don't want piano lessons. They don't really want to learn how to read music or study music on the staff. They want to understand, like, what was going through Jimmy Page's mind when he put those chords together at the beginning of Stairway to Heaven, you
Right.
know? Or how does Eric Clapton know how to instantly jump into key and know what scale to play over any song?
Exactly. And I think that's something that also really helped me kind of like solidify a lot of that as, you provide these examples of, okay, this in like just the intro to this song is using E minor pentatonic. And so, I would go back and I would listen to the song and I'm like, all right, I know E minor pentatonic. So I'm going to just listen to it and see if I can pick it out using this scale form. And it made so much more sense to me than just well, it made kind of like a different type of sense than the way I would have approached it before, was just to just look up the tab. Or if I was feeling really ambitious, I would attempt to pick it out by ear, but it was basically just through trial and error instead of being able to say, okay, well, at least I know this is a scale that's being used. And now let me see if I can figure it out in kind of like a more with more of an educated guess system than just like plunking out the tune, so to speak. So that I thought was really cool, and it's helped me make my way out of that kind of trap that I think a lot of people fall into with the guitar, which is that you don't need music theory to physically play songs, right? You don't need to be able to read, like a staff notation. You can just look up the tab and it will tell you which strings to play and which frets to play. And you could feasibly do that for a long time, but the odds of you actually understanding the instrument are much, much slimmer than if you're, going to get into the theory of it. And that is the bridge that I was really struggling, the gap that I was really struggling to bridge was, especially as a songwriter, and a singer. I've grown up listening to music. I write my songs kind of like out of thin air. I don't write them to accompaniment. I hear sort of the chord progression in my head. I write a vocal melody over it, and then I will go and put it onto an instrument. And so what I identified was that the gap was that I didn't know how to get my songs from my head into the guitar without that sort of trial and error system, right? And so ear training has been something that recently I've begun to focus almost all of my energy on, because it's very easy. When you're a vocalist, you might know vocal warm-ups that involve intervals, or it's easy for me to harmonize. But to tell you what interval I'm actually singing when I'm doing the harmony would take a little more effort, So that's kind of where I'm at now, is focusing increasingly on ear training, but also the formal theory, knowing what notes are in all the scales and all that kind of fun stuff, which like you kind of alluded to, people initially might shy away from when they're trying to learn the guitar, because they might just want to learn songs or, whatever the case may be. But I'm realizing more and more that I can't skip that step. So here we are.
Yeah, at some point, when guitar players want to get serious, then it's that information can become very helpful. It's not really that helpful in the beginning stages. In fact, even though I write and sell books on music theory, when people ask me for my advice, particularly the beginners, I say, hold off on that. Get yourself a guitar, learn how to tune it, learn how to set it up properly so it's not difficult to play, and you don't quit, thinking that you can't do it. Learn some basic chords, learn how to strum along with some familiar songs, just get used to the feel for it.
And it may be confusing to people. It may be too much information to people that are just starting out.
For sure. I do say in the book and in the book description, it's not for beginners.
Right.
I do have a book on Amazon called The Beginner Guitar, The Beginner, is this the one? The Beginner Guitar Primer by Desi Cerna, which is a really short read. You can actually read it for free if you're an Amazon Kindle subscriber, whatever they call that. I'm going blank on that whole collection of stuff where you can read free Kindles. It's a really short read, and it's let me tell you what the guitar learning process should be like, and how you should start, just to help people get on the right track, because sometimes people just really don't know what they're looking for or what they need. So they might buy a book like Fretboard Theory thinking that that's going to be where they're going to start. And it's not really the good place to start. I also have some free instruction on my website, guitarmusictheory.com. One of the options you see on the website is that you are starting from scratch and need to learn the basics. And I've got a whole free video course where it's like I just sit down, like we're doing one-on-one lessons, and I'm going to explain how the guitar works to you and get you started from scratch. But so I think that's actually a good way to learn. That's how I learned. That's how I like people to learn. But then at some point, if you've done well and you can, play a variety of things, it is helpful to kind of understand what you're doing, particularly if you want to advance to be a songwriter, or you want to advance in order to, play in bands. And so you might need to learn some terminology just so you can communicate with other musicians. You need to learn how to, recognize common patterns in music. You need to be able to think on your feet in some situations and know how to identify a basic key and how to follow a chord progression or hop in with a scale to improvise a little solo. And that's all the stuff that you're going to learn from Fretboard Theory. And so, once people are beyond the basics and they can actually play songs, then that's when I would say consider, taking a look at Fretboard Theory. And particularly for you as a songwriter as well, you said that you sometimes just start with an idea in your head. You might hear a lyrical phrase or a melody or something. And that's usually how the songs start. Well, but if you have an understanding of, let me grab my guitar here. So, you might be starting on a particular chord, G, and you might be singing a particular note. Maybe your melody is the third or something. And so if you're familiar with like an arpeggio and how to play the notes of a chord, immediately it's like, that, okay, well, all of these notes are in the chord. So as you're trying to kind of flesh out that melody and wondering where is it going to go to next, you've got those notes available under your fingertips, and then you can connect that to, okay, well, but what scale is that out of? Well, it's, in the major scale. So again, like you immediately know that, okay, well, I can noodle around on that scale and maybe I'll figure out where the melody is going to go next. And then you can think about the chords. Well, how do you harmonize the scale and what are the other chords in the scale? You get this, harmonized scale here. And so as a songwriter, it's like, it's so helpful to know this stuff because then you can just, you can explore all the different directions you can take that initial idea and kind of flesh it out and add harmony. It's not just a guessing game. I tell people that knowing where to look is half the battle. So sometimes your ear will serve you well and a good idea will come to you. And then sometimes you just run into a brick wall and you're like, I don't know where I'm going with this song, or I don't know what the harmony should be here or something. So to be able to physically play something on the guitar and say, well, here's what I got to work with, and you can find where you need to go. And if you're not a songwriter, this is all still just as useful. If you're trying to play in bands or trying to learn music or just trying to take your playing to the next level. So yeah. And then in Fretboard Theory, it's all pattern oriented so that once you're in a position with a particular chord, that it connects to an arpeggio or a scale, and you can see those connections. It's right under your fingertips, so you kind of know where to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for me as an artist, it's really about kind of removing that barrier to creativity, right? Like I might have an idea and I'm really excited about it, and then I'm going to sit down and I could, spend a bunch of time through trial and error trying to plunk out what the instrumentation is going to be. Or if I am able to identify what key I'm in, then it's going to be a much quicker creative process to be able to lay down like what I'm kind of hearing in my head and actualize that into a chord structure or something like that. But also coming up with more interesting voicings, so I'm not just limited to power chords, that sort of thing. So that's really kind of like my goal is to just increase my fluency in that sort of ear to guitar or ear to any instrument, really conversion. And especially because I live with my partner who's my co-producer, and he's been playing like every instrument known to man since he was like 3 years old or something. So it's very fluid for him. And I'm so envious of that ability that I was like, you know what, I'm
And that's where your artist name comes from, right?
right. So, I was like, I want to be like that, and I'm going to figure out how I can make that happen. So, especially in the past couple of months, I've been really, really focused on, just kind of familiarizing myself and gaining that sort of confidence where it's like, okay, well, if I'm in this scale, then I know I have these chords at my disposal, and even if I don't exactly know where I'm going to go, I at least know the patterns. So,
Yeah.
you can kind of go from there. And it's started to click in ways that I don't think I would have been able to accomplish on my own, through just kind of, some people just say like, oh, just learn a bunch of songs and it'll eventually make sense. But I was doing that and it wasn't working. So, I could play a bunch of songs and that's fine. But whether or not I understood why they were structured that way and what was actually going on is another conversation.
Yeah. I think sometimes songwriters and guitar players in general, um, they have the idea that, well, I don't want to learn about music because then I'm just going to be a copycat. I'm going to be kind of forced to follow, a certain template, and I just want to kind of make up my own thing and be original. Um, and I usually tell them, uh, if if you have the attitude that you want to break the rules, you really can't break the rules if you don't know the rules, you know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's true for any art form, right? You have to study the classics in order to deviate from them. And
And sometimes people think, yeah, I don't know any music theory. I just made this up. It's all so original. Let me play in my riff. And I'm like, wow, you just discovered the minor pentatonic that's been used thousands of times. Like they didn't even realize that they just settled into something that was very, very common, you know.
yeah. And I think to a certain extent, that's kind of the trap that I fell into. Not necessarily that I wasn't listening to music. I listened to a ton of music. And I think that actively listening to music is one of the best things you can do for, your creativity, and to get inspiration. But what was happening is I was like, well, I don't need to know music theory to write something that sounds good. But then I couldn't produce what I wanted because it was taking me so long to get it from my head into the guitar or onto the keyboard or whatever instrument it was. And like you said, being able to communicate it to another person. So I work with another producer. He and I are both producers on the records that I release under Agent Envy. And when you have that vocabulary of, okay, this is what key we're in, this is what time signature we're in, or whatever the case may be, you're not wasting all of that creative energy and time on just trying to figure out where you guys are and then going from there. So,
I think people don't realize that if you're kind of a naturally creative person without having really learned much, sometimes they're fearful that like learning about music is going to somehow ruin their natural creativity. But actually, just the opposite is true. Like, if you're a naturally creative person and you start learning more about music, you're going to be even more creative because all of a sudden it's like you have all of these additional ideas that you can explore. And I mean, any accomplished musician or songwriter, they really do understand music far more than people realize,
right.
Like,
Yeah, I remember listening to one of your recent episodes and you were talking about, I think this comes up frequently, but talking about how, Paul McCartney and all of the Beatles were really, by the time they started making music, they had played they learned and played so many songs and knew all these covers from other artists. And here they are, lauded as like the greatest group of all time. So there's obviously not like a negative correlation between knowing about music and being incredibly creative.
And you can
So
say that about so many bands. I mean, like, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin,
right.
Grateful Dead, the Rolling Stones, all these iconic bands, essentially started out as cover bands.
Yeah.
They had such a repertoire of music that by the time they started to write their own music, like they just had so much experience. They knew how things went together, and it didn't hold their creativity back at all. And in fact, that's exactly what I heard Paul McCartney say in an interview. He said, man, by the time I started to write music, he's like, I had spent so many years just learning and learning and learning and playing and playing and playing and playing. And, he and John Lennon were big fans of the Everly Brothers. And he said, so we would learn the harmonies, and will you sing this note? And I'll sing down here and that note. And they taught themselves how to sing in harmony. And even though they may not have been able to write a book on it, or they may not have been able to describe what they were doing, maybe in correct technical terms, they knew what they were doing. They made those connections in their head. They knew what it meant to sing in harmony. They knew how to play in major keys and minor keys. They knew what predictable chord changes were and used it when it was appropriate. They knew, how to make things sound a little crooked now and then, and use that to good effect. And that's really that's what I mean when I tell people like you should learn a music theory or learn music. I don't mean that you should be studying a bunch of Italian musical expression terms because you're going to try to pass an entrance exam to Juilliard or something like that. And no offense to that. I mean, that has its place too, and that might interest someone. But when I talk about
that
theory,
level of knowledge it's really impressive, but it's just might not be necessary for you, so.
Yeah. I mean, for some people, it might be. I remember in one episode of the podcast, when I was talking about whether or not someone should read music, I said, well, here's the deal. If you go out and get a note reading method from Mel Bay, the granddaddy of all guitar methods, he basically transposed clarinet music for guitar because they were in a similar range and stuff, and you learn how to play these old-fashioned melodies. And I said, let's be realistic. How many guitar players out there want to play clarinet music? Well, anyway, somebody emailed me and said, it's funny you should say that because I play clarinet and I wanted to pick up the guitar to learn how to play clarinet on the guitar. So it's like, look, I mean, there's something for everyone. But for most people, when you get bit by the guitar bug, you love pop and rock, from the 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, and you really just want to know, man, how did these people know how to put these songs together? How do they know how to navigate the fretboard? When they're going from rhythm, to lead to the riff, and that's, how are they tracking their movement? What's going on in their brain to help them, navigate and put things together that way? And there definitely is something going on in everybody's brain, even though, again, they're not going to be able to communicate it in a manner where they could write a book on it. I couldn't really communicate it in a manner, or, as I was learning how to play myself and just developing as a guitar player and teaching lessons, I had to kind of figure out, how do I explain to my students what's going on in my brain when things are clicking, and how and what type of music theory is involved with that, and how can I put a method together here that any guitar player who's similar, who's like me, that loves popular music and stuff, would find useful.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then fretboard theory came out of that, and you went viral with it. So
What a series of events.
Yeah, that really is amazing, and I'm so glad that you did that. I mean, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, because again, it's like, I don't advertise. Word of mouth is a big part of how I bring attention to what I do, and I try to tell my customers and stuff, because people will oftentimes take time to write me some really thoughtful emails and everything, and I do appreciate that, and I always reply, and I say, thank you so much, I'm so glad that these materials are working for you, and thanks for the feedback. But whenever I get something like that, I'm always like, if they had posted this as a review on Amazon, or if they put a video, if they like, I love to hear it, but even I would love for more people to hear this. So for everyone listening, who has had a good experience with one of my video courses or books or something, you could send it to me. I would love to hear about your experience. I do appreciate reading that, but I love it when people actually go out there and post reviews and put it online, make recommendations on Reddit. I don't know who made that recommendation to you, but I appreciate that. You're probably not gonna get as many views as Alejandra did, because she just blew it up. But
and I think it's funny that you say that, actually, because one of the things that I've learned as an artist, and maybe other aspiring artists who are listening can benefit from this, is that you have to tell your audience how to support you in like step-by-step ways. And so something that I've realized is that as I was starting to release music, I would get questions from friends and family members. They're like, okay, well, what can I actually do to share this? Or how can I boost this post? Or how can I, do whatever it is that I need to do to help you get your music out there? And I kind of came to this realization that the average, I had been so ingrained in doing music marketing that it seemed like second nature to me. And then I kind of forgot that the average person who's just listening to music doesn't know that you need to actually comment on a post, or you need to send the song to your friends, or send it to people, or add it to a playlist, or whatever the case may be. And whatever your industry is, telling people how they can actually support you in the most efficient way is a really important part of being an artist, or being, a business person in general. So, I think it's important to remember that sometimes you got to tell people how they can best support you too.
absolutely, especially in this day and age, right? Because, it's not like people can't hear your music and say, oh, well, Sony Records will take care of that for her. No, you're an independent artist. And even people who are signed to major labels these days, the labels are still dependent upon social media, word of mouth. I mean, that's just how it works now.
People, you can't, you could get the greatest record deal ever, but if nobody's listening to if you don't have people to support you, it's not going to work out. So,
Yeah.
it's really crucial to have other people involved, and for people to understand how they as an individual can participate in supporting you.
Yeah. So I noticed you had a couple of videos on your TikTok too, where you were actually teaching some things, and I thought you did a great job with that, just playing and explaining things. I learned early on that explaining things is not something that anyone can do, like and so I thought you did a good job with that.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, you should do more of that. I think that it's going to help you build your audience there, and you're welcome to share anything that you've learned from me. I wouldn't have any issue with that. I want to say this. So you got the Fretboard Theory book.
Yes.
And again, it's not for beginners. Learn the basics and really learn more than the basics. Learn how to actually get yourself to an intermediate level of playing where you can strum along with complete songs, and you can use open chords and power chords and bar chords and all that sort of stuff. If you need help, go to guitarmusictheory.com. I have free stuff for that. But then when you're ready to really kind of understand how things work, Fretboard Theory would be a great place to start. I wrote Fretboard Theory Volume 2.
Right.
So this gets into kind of next level stuff. Okay, what's modal interchange? What's a secondary dominant? What's chord tone soloing? What's harmonic minor? All useful stuff still. This is all still stuff that you would hear on the radio. This isn't like deep jazz theory or anything like that. So I actually self-published these books and sold them on Amazon for years, and they became decent sellers in their category. It's a small niche market, so it's not like I got rich or could ever get rich off of something like this. But I sold enough copies that I got attention from the For Dummies publisher, and they contacted me and said, "Hey, you're selling really well in this genre. Would you author a book for us? So I wrote the book Guitar Theory for Dummies. And it's basically the same material that's in Fretboard Theory Volume 1 and 2. It's kind of a rewrite, condensed a little bit. Either title, if someone's interested in learning about music theory, either title is fine. And if you've got one, I don't know that you necessarily need the other. Now, if you get the For Dummies book, there's some video clips and stuff online that are helpful. But one thing I did differently for Fretboard Theory is I made a full-blown video version. It's like over 30 hours of video, because the books are wonderful, but at the end of the day, like, music is something that we listen to, and so there was just a lot of demand for people wanting me to play through all this stuff. So I created a video version of Fretboard Theory where you can literally see and hear everything in action, and it really gives me an opportunity to present things differently, because there's some things you can play that you just can't put into words. And I've got lots of resources that are in the little member area there where you view the course. So there's some links to backing tracks and other useful stuff that you can use to really start applying everything. It's a big comprehensive video course. Some people prefer that because a book just doesn't completely click for them. Again, they need to kind of see and hear everything in action. Now, you've got the book. You're not enrolled in the course, but I would love to enroll you in the course for free, Alejandra. So when we wrap up here,
Oh, awesome.
I'd be happy, to get you enrolled in that. In fact, we can talk more about maybe some of your goals or what you're working on, and if there's anything I have that I think would be a good fit for you.
I'm sure there's something I can learn from you.
Yeah. So let's see. Let's talk a little bit about your songwriting. You mentioned that you've got a partner that you work with. I played a little bit of your song Hospital Socks. And let's talk a little bit about that's a song that you wrote?
Yeah, so I write all of my songs, and my songwriting process is typically like I will write the vocal melody and lyrics almost completely, and then I will approach my partner slash boyfriend slash co-producer and we'll work out the instrumentation. And when we were working together in 2020, that was very much the process, right? It was like I would basically sing an entire song into my voice notes, send it to him, because everything was like remote at this point. And so we were just kind of sending tracks back and forth. And then we would come together on the instrumentation. And so for those earlier songs, the majority of the lead guitar and stuff was written by him. But as we started to get a little bit later, that's when I was like, I want to be more involved in this, in the instrumentation. I didn't just want to be the singer songwriter. I wanted to also be the producer on the tracks as well. And so especially as my style kind of really started to solidify later, with one of my last original tracks is called Sleeping with a Ghost. And, the way that, I can grab my guitar and kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about, but because I write songs that I would say are kind of in the trip hop category, the way that I approach songwriting on the guitar is almost as if I'm writing my own samples, because trip hop, if you're not familiar with it, is like a very sample-based genre. And so there's a lot of kind of like lo-fi hip hop beats, but also guitar licks and things that are kind of droning throughout the record. And so in this song, Sleeping with a Ghost, that's the approach that I took. So it's got this kind of recurring guitar line that starts at the beginning and it just plays throughout the entire track. And I'll play a little bit. This is how it goes. And so, it's very simple. It's like B major third, B minor third.
Going back and
And
forth between a major tonality and a minor tonality.
right. And that's something that is kind of like a recurring theme in my music, and also probably like in a lot of 90s rock and early 2000s rock, is that sort of major minor thing.
Can I play a little bit off of that off of Spotify
Yeah,
for a second? Yeah,
absolutely.
here it is on Spotify.
When your soul left the house, you left your body lying next to me. They never carried you out. All of the colors drain right from your cheeks.
So it's an idea that started on the guitar, and then you had the lyrics and melody, and then so
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it kind of, sometimes things kind of happen like all at once in a way, right? And I knew that I wanted there to be this kind of droning repetitiveness, because at least when I'm writing instrumentation, I try to write something that mirrors what the song is trying to communicate. So, I'm not thinking so much about, okay, what chord am I, what key am I in, or what scale am I going to use? Which kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Is that I'm a much more like ear-based songwriter. But I knew that I just wanted this sort of repetitive kind of droning guitar. And then as the song develops, you can hear that, it goes into like a more full-blown chord structure. And there's Richie, my partner and co-producer, does a solo in the middle of the song towards the end. But that's kind of the way that I approach my guitar songwriting. And he approaches that from the completely other angle, is that he's a bassist, he's a guitarist. So he's approaching it more from the instrumentation first, and I will approach it from vocals first. So, when we kind of get together, it's awesome because he kind of can fill in these gaps that I, might not know exactly where to go, especially when it comes to things like harmonizing chords under, a melody in a more interesting way than just like power chords. Or I might know exactly what sort of root note I can hear in my head, and I could pick something like that out. But as far as what other notes are going to go to complement that, or what licks are going to happen at any particular point in time, like I said, he's been playing for a much, much longer period of time, so he's super fluent in those instruments.
I'll just say something about that. So, if you have a B chord or something, you might play an ordinary, bar chord with
Right.
the root there, or maybe you break it up and you do something like, or maybe you put the third in the bass, or it's something like. So one of the things you learn in a book like Fretboard Theory, it's like, okay, well, if you know how to play a chord, where are those notes located all over the fretboard? How can you play different voicings? How can you change the order that the notes are stacked in? And yeah, a good guitar player isn't just going to be stuck with that one most basic form of a chord. He's going to understand how he can play
Right.
versions of that same chord all over the fretboard. And they're all going to, even though it's all the same chord, it's all going to sound a little bit different. And as you're crafting a song, you want to make it sound interesting, and you want it to sound distinct, and find, every time you're crafting a song, you're trying to find what's this song's musical identity, what's its sound, and
Yeah.
one of the,
And I think it's like you said, it's useful in being able to cycle through. Okay, well, I know that I'm doing this major minor thing. So where can, what traditionally could fit in, and then you could decide, I actually want to deviate from that a little bit. Whereas if you're just relying on your ear, you can still come up with really great ideas, but you might not stumble onto something unexpected like you would if you're kind of like, okay, well, let me play through my options here and see what I actually end up liking. So it's interesting to see how the both of us approach guitar in different ways, and approach songwriting in different ways. As I've become more familiar with production and with guitar, I've actually started to write songs in the other direction, right? Where I will write the guitar part first, or I'll write the instrumentation first, and then go on to come up with a melody over it, which is like the complete opposite of what I'd ever done before. So it's interesting. And like you said, you know, knowing more helps you to be more creative. It doesn't, you know, stifle you in any way.
Those are melodies that may never have come to you, but then as you're fiddling around on the guitar and putting chords together, all of a sudden it sparked an idea.
Yeah, you know, I was listening to one of your podcasts recently where you're talking about that D chord, which is like D add 9. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's the one that looks like and I immediately was like, oh, gotta go home and write a song. So, you know, it gives you, and I knew that chord from Hurt by Johnny Cash, I think it's in.
Yes.
Or is it?
I think it is.
I think it is.
I was kind of going through a list of like trying to figure out what songs might I reference. I'm pretty sure that came up.
Yeah. And so it's things like that where all of a sudden it's like something like gets plugged into each other and you're like, I know what this is now. Not only have I been playing it, but now I know that it has a name and I know why it's like, I kind of understand how it works. And I also I don't know, there's something about that chord that inherently feels like very kind of nostalgic to listen to. And I feel like I can write an entire song based on one particular chord, like the whole idea just kind of comes out. And then obviously it will go somewhere beyond just that one chord, but there's something about those kind of interesting voicings that really resonate with me and can take you into like a different direction than you may have otherwise come up with if just left to your own devices.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, it's like music is rhythm and pitch and harmony, and it's all variations on that. So when you learn all those different variations, it makes a creative person more creative and sparks a lot of ideas. So I love that. So Richie here, he's kind of he's a lot farther down the guitar path than you. He's into music production and instrumentation, and you're coming from the more of the songwriter, you know, artist side, although there's artistry involved in his work. But I love how, so you're learning more about music so that like you can kind of like meet him halfway and you guys can work better together.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really kind of how, that's really what pushed me beyond just like my own desire to be a better guitarist and be a better musician. I was, you know, we'd have production sessions and I would get frustrated by my inability to articulate the ideas that were in my head. And, you know, because he's been a musician and a producer for such a long time that it's like, he's very efficient at getting his ideas out. And I was like, that's not fair. So I'm going to get better at this. And it's, I mean, even I think one of the things that if I wish I could communicate like one idea to people who are kind of just getting started with either learning an instrument or learning production is that it takes less time than you think it's going to make progress. Like it can seem really overwhelming to think about becoming an expert in playing the guitar or music production or whatever the case may be, but you can progress pretty quickly past sort of like where you currently are right now. And, you know, it's so rewarding to get past that sort of plateau or just to learn a new concept and then be able to apply that concept, especially in like a working setting where you've got an idea and you're communicating with someone else and you're like, I actually know how to get this idea out right now. And it's not as far out of reach as I think a lot of people assume it is. Like my dad actually just started learning the bass, and he'd been thinking about learning the bass guitar for a really long time. And he actually had played the trumpet a long, long time ago, like throughout high school and college, but hadn't really picked up an instrument since. And when we were talking to him about it, because Richie's a bassist, and that's like, even though he, shreds on guitar, the bass is the instrument that he loves the most. And so, of course, he and I were both trying to convince my dad, like, you got to play the bass. It's going to be so much fun. But my dad had this idea that it was going to take him too long to get to where he wanted to be. And I was like, well, the time's going to pass regardless of how you spend it. So you have to,
some good wisdom right there. I like that.
And I think I have a whole bunch of those kind of like little quotes that I heard once that absolutely blew my mind. And I was like, okay, well, now I have to start. But it's true, if 6 months from now, you could either start playing guitar, or you could be 6 months into playing guitar. But regardless, like, the time's still going to pass no matter how you spend it. But the other thing was just that we both encouraged him that you're going to be able to play songs much quicker than you think. You don't, like we were talking about earlier, you don't need to go back and read sheet music or anything like that. But even if you did, you would still likely make progress quicker than I think a lot of people assume, just because they perceive this kind of like mountain of knowledge that they somehow need to master all at once. And that's not the case at all. So, it's worth
and you don't have to be an expert either. You don't have to be a virtuoso.
Yeah.
Like, it's perfectly okay to just say, you know what, I'm just an average guitar player. Like, that's a good place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I have like a very, what, people would refer to as like a type A personality. And I can be kind of obsessed with self-improvement, or, just like improving my life, or whatever, whatever the case may be. And, this goes back to one of the reasons about how I stumbled across your book, is that I was like, I want to find out exactly how many hours I need to practice guitar until I can become an advanced guitarist. And so I was like doing these calculations, and I was like, all right, if I practice 1 hour a day, every day for the next 5 years, like, I'm going to, be the next whatever virtuoso. And at the same time, I was like, well, I don't have that much time around my guitar every day because I'm traveling. And hence I was like, there's got to be some way I can like hack this, essentially. And, lo and behold, I did not manage to spend an hour every single day practicing guitar for 5 years. But, I am chipping away at it. And I don't know that I will ever become as fluent in guitar as I am as a vocalist. But, I stopped kind of having this attitude that I wasn't going to ever make it past where I was. And I was like, you know what, I'm determined to actually figure this out.
Yeah.
And that kind of attitude alone, I think, makes a big difference. Your mindset has a really big impact on your progress and your sort of ability to learn or accomplish whatever it is that you're trying to get through.
Yeah, sometimes we psych ourselves out,
Yeah.
I do get emails sometimes when people are like, well, how long what should it take me to finish this book or this video course or play this or play that? And I try to be polite, but I really just want to say, relax, just learn something, explore it, have fun with it, see what you take away from it, and just enjoy the process. Like, it's not, this isn't a competition. You don't have to like get it down in a certain amount of time.
And I think that's something that, I at least recently realized is that, okay, I was practicing guitar, but I didn't have I was just practicing for the sake of having the time that I was practicing, right? But I didn't have like a specific direction that I was heading, or like a goal, which seems silly because you would think the goal is like to get better at guitar, but that could mean a lot of different things, and you can practice the pentatonic patterns all day, but you might get really good at them. You could play them with your eyes closed and whatever, but then how do you apply that? Or what's your goal in learning the pentatonic scale or whatever it is that you may be learning beyond just like spending okay, I did my 15 minutes of practice and, or whatever, duration, and now I'm done for the day. And then you do the same thing the next day and the next day and the next day. And so something that I've become really kind of like conscious of recently is it's not just how much time you're spending on something, but it's like why you're spending that time and what you're trying to actually get out of that session. And so when I posted to my followers that we were going to be having this conversation, and somebody was asking, like, how do you make practicing fun and not just feel like this rote thing that you have to do? And I think that's a big part of it, is that you have to have a goal. It's not fun if you just do the same thing over and over again and you're not progressing towards something, because I would assume that you want to play the guitar for fun, because it's going to be a fun and satisfying thing to do whenever you get to that point. So as you're working towards that, you have to, that practice needs to facilitate whatever it is that your goal is. It shouldn't just
lead somewhere. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to just be perpetually practicing. Yeah, that's a good point. And I always tell people, like, you do want to set goals. And goals can be as simple as, I'm going to learn how to strum along with a song all the way through, beginning to end.
Yeah.
And I'm going to record myself and I'm going to put it up on my Facebook and say, look at me, I'm strumming along with this Bob Dylan song because I'm an average guitar player. And that's a big accomplishment for me right now. It might be like you say, I'm going to learn how to play 5 pentatonic riffs. Or you might learn your favorite guitar solo. Maybe you can't even play the whole solo, but you're going to say, well, I'm going to figure out how much I can play.
Yeah.
I'll amplify what I can't play. And then I'm going to record myself playing along with a backing track. These are all really great goals. This is what I try to encourage people to do. And, when I look back at my own guitar journey, I was always doing that sort of thing, although I didn't realize that I was doing it. But I just got sucked in, and I'd be like, well, I'm going to learn how to play along with these songs. And, Led Zeppelin have so many great riffs. I'm going to learn how to play like 10 Led Zeppelin riffs. And then me and my buddies are going to jam at, a friend's graduation party. So I'm going to learn the bass for all the songs so I can play the bass. So I just always wanted to do something and kind of, and have these little goals. And of course that stuff accumulates. And over the years, it's how you get good. So I don't like the idea where people say, well, my practice routine is I review the pentatonic patterns for 15 minutes, and then I review major scale patterns for 15 minutes, and then I practice arpeggios for 15 minutes. I don't want to tell people that they can't do that, but personally, I don't like to do that. Like when I learn something, I'll put the time into learning it and familiarize myself with it. But then I very quickly want to move past practicing or rehearsing it, and I want to start using it.
Right.
So I tell people, once you're familiar with the pentatonic patterns, you really probably shouldn't be spending much time practicing them. You should be spending time playing pentatonic songs.
Yeah. You need to apply the knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like where I'm at now, is that one, you can't really focus on there's so much to know on the guitar, right? And I think a lot of people who, and I'm guilty, I had been guilty of this too, is that there is some stuff that I feel like people think they should be practicing. So like you said, I should practice this scale, or I should practice this arpeggio or whatever. And that is what I'm doing. I kind of have this exercise right now that I made up, which I'm sure exists somewhere. And actually, as I've been rereading your book, I think it's similar to one of the exercises that you have in there. But so my goal is to be more comfortable navigating a key signature. So, I'm kind of working my way through the circle of fifths, and I'll start with C. And I'll say to myself, okay, no sharps, no flats. And then I'll be like, all right, relative minor, A. And then, I will find every C on the guitar, because I want to become more familiar with the with the fretboard, and then I'll play my way through the C major scale. I'll play my way through A minor pentatonic. I'll do the arpeggios, but I also will like sing each note as I'm kind of playing through the scales as well, because I've recognized that there's a deficiency in my knowledge of the fretboard, like in certain areas as I get kind of higher up, or like towards the like first and second strings. So that's something that I'm working towards, and it's like weirdly fun for me to progress past one key signature into the next one on the circle of fifths. And then I'll play through some songs that I know in those keys, and I'm like, oh, it's starting to make sense to me. It's really connecting those dots. And so I think it's kind of a good practice to come up with like your own little exercises that help you work towards your specific goals, right? Not just, well, I feel like I should know this, so I'm going to practice it, but it's got to lead you somewhere. But the end goal can't just be, well, now I know the major scale. Like, there's got to be something, there has to be something beyond that.
The end goal has to be, well, now I can play these songs that use the major scale and I understand what they're doing. And then I can listen to songs on the radio that I haven't learned, and I can say, oh, wait a minute, that sounds like this song, that must be the major scale. You come home, a little trial and error, you figure it out. People think, wow, you must be some sort of musical genius. How did you figure that out? It's like, well, because knowing where to look is half the battle. You're starting to make the connections between these things on the fretboard and the music that you listen to. And for you, you could even take it to the next step, which is, you've reviewed a key. You've learned how to play some songs that are in that key and kind of analyzed how they're moving throughout between the notes in that key. And then you could say, I'm going to write some songs in this key as well. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
What you're talking about, I try to encourage everyone to do.
Yeah, and I think, like, to go back to that user's question, is that's what makes it fun for me. That's not maybe going to be fun for anybody else, but like that's why I'm learning. That's what my goal is with the guitar, right? Is to work towards that songwriting. So you have to think about, like, you as an individual player, what your goal is, and that practice will facilitate that goal. And I would assume that's what makes it fun for people, is that you're getting the satisfaction that you're getting towards that goal of yours. If you're just practicing something because like somebody online told you it's a good thing to practice, but it doesn't meet your individual goals, then you're probably not going to have a very good time.
Yeah. I talk a lot about how there's a lot of things that people practice that I don't do and never did, but everyone assumes that, well, aren't you supposed to like to play exercises and stuff like that? And I'm like, honestly, that's not really what got me to where I am. I think one of the reasons why that has become so popular, and why I think some people have gotten a little off track with some of that stuff, is because if you're in the business of publishing instructional content and trying to sell a book or video, you have to create something.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of books and videos where it's like they're going to give you fingering exercises, or they're going to teach you how to play various types of scales. And whether or not those fingering exercises are really useful, or whether those scales would ever get used in any familiar piece of music, doesn't matter. They're going to fill that book up, because that's what they're selling, and also because of the issues with copyrighted music and stuff. The reality is, anyone that ever got good at guitar by listening to records and playing along with stuff and learning, from their influences. Well, you can't exactly publish that stuff because of copyright issues. So what are you going to fill a book with? And the dirty little secret is me being kind of the inside of this. Like, I know that it's like that's what they're going to do. It's like, hey, people are going to go to Amazon, and they're going to want to get better at guitar, and so they want something that's going to strengthen their fingers. They want to they're going to search keywords like guitar exercises or guitar scales. So we need to fill up books with exercises or scales. So we match
Right.
their search, and we have something to sell them. And there are some books that, are very popular. And I don't want to pick apart anybody's work. I don't want people to get the wrong impression here. But, I'm pretty frank on the podcast and with my students when I connect with them on Zoom. And I'm like, look, if you like playing these exercises, and I'm not going to spoil your fun. I said, but, you came to me because you said, Desi, how can you play all this great music and you know all these songs and you can improvise? I want to be like that. Like, I'm going to be honest and say, I didn't get there by playing these exercises, and I didn't get there by playing these scale patterns because I can't even name a single guitar player who uses those scale patterns, Um, I mean, the vast majority of popular music is some sort of variation of pentatonic patterns or major scale patterns. And of course, if you get fretboard theory, I explain how the major scale patterns could be modal, that could be the minor. You could make a little alteration to make the harmonic minor, yada, yada, yada. I'm bloviating here, but if your goal is to play music, you got to play music. And sometimes exercises and theory do play a role in that, but you don't want your practice time to get too off track where you're just practicing and you're not actually making music. You really want to make music. I really appreciate all of your input. It's fantastic. Alejandra, you're a great guest here, and you're not only just kind of validating a lot of the ideas that I've been espousing on the podcast here for a long time, but you're very well spoken, and you've had some really additional input. So if you've got anything else you'd like to say on it, go ahead. But I also understand that you have some questions from some of your followers, and maybe we could transition into that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have much else to say other than I think if you're thinking about learning guitar or any instrument really, or if you're actively in the practice of it, or you're trying to be an artist, just really think about what your own individual goals are. It can be really easy to get swept up on what other people are doing and what other people are telling you, especially now because everybody likes to kind of position themselves as an expert in everything, especially on social media. But listen to yourself and think about what you actually want for your own musicianship or artistry. And then you can kind of backtrack and figure out, well, how do I get there? So like for me, I mentioned that I wanted to connect my ear to the guitar, and I recognized that part of what was holding me back was that I didn't have that kind of music theory knowledge to bridge that gap. And I wasn't familiar enough with the fretboard to do that either. So, if I'm looking for exercises, it's going to be that kind of focus. But that might not be everybody's goal. Maybe somebody just wants to play along with songs, or they want to be a completely different type of guitarist than I am or have any desire to be. But I always love encouraging people. As you can tell, I'm really passionate about a lot of different topics. And anytime I find something that I find helps me a lot in my life, I love to talk to people about it because I want other people to, be happy and enjoy their lives and progress with their own goals. So, that's kind of a lot of the type of content that I make, right? Is I'm telling people about something that I discovered or that works, not discovered, but that I discovered works for me. Because I want to help people, and I like encouraging people. And I just think there's enough gatekeeping and enough negativity out there that there doesn't need to be any more. There needs to be more people encouraging each other, especially in the music industry.
Yeah, and that comes across. I think that's why I think that's why you built such a good following here, like on TikTok, and I'm assuming you have followers on other platforms as well.
Yeah.
That definitely comes across, how you just described yourself, and I think people appreciate that, and they want to see more of that. And you know what? That goes back to, why did people suddenly become interested about you talking about how excited you were about learning all this stuff from a book? Because I think they pick up on your enthusiasm, and then they know that your passion and all of that. And so, Alejandra, I couldn't have had a better person
That's
look
so
at
nice.
book
Thank you so much.
recommendations. So it's really wonderful. So do you have some good questions that we could discuss?
Yes, I do. So let me just pull up my notes. I'm a big journaler, so everything is handwritten for me. So I actually had a question for you before we jump into our some questions from my followers. I was wondering if there is anything guitar related that you feel like you're currently stuck on or are trying to practice yourself.
Me?
Yeah.
I'm currently stuck on or trying to practice myself. Um, you can never stop learning. And no
Yeah.
matter how good you get at something, there's always going to be things that you're not good at. I like to point out that B.B. King was considered a virtuoso at what he did, but he couldn't play like Slash from Guns N' Roses. He couldn't play like Chet Atkins. Um, and Eddie Van Halen was just a complete game changer. A super gifted musician, but he wasn't John Mayer.
Hmm.
That just wouldn't be his vibe,
Right.
Um, and you know, uh, I guess what I'm getting at here is that um, at some point I had to realize that I have to stop trying to always progress.
Mhm.
We can't be all things. You know,
Right.
Eddie Van Halen he was Eddie Van Halen, and BB King was BB King. And John Mayer is just trying to be John Mayer, even though we know that they all have influences. John Mayer has a lot of Stevie Ray Vaughan influences and stuff, but he's still like, you know, he's not. He's just trying to stay in his lane
Yeah.
and do his thing. And so that's what I've really been trying to focus on. For me, it hasn't like I'm a huge fan of the guitarist Eric Johnson. So, he recorded Cliffs of Dover, which is just this
Yeah.
spectacular instrumental with some of the most, spectacular guitar playing ever recorded. And he's a freak of nature. Um, and he also, I think that he also probably practiced 14 hours a day on top of that.
Yeah.
And I
I
just
don't think
love
I
it.
had that much time.
Yeah. And of course, who wouldn't want to be able to pick up their guitar and just play like a virtuoso or, recreate note for note some, spectacular guitar recording. And I think that like pursuing that, it's a healthy part of how we explore things and figure out what we're comfortable with and develop our style and get good. But at some point, you got to realize that, you know what? Like, I've got enough here to work with. I need to just kind of like, I need to just work with it.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's kind of a non-answer. I would say my answer is that I realized that I need to stop trying to push myself sometimes to the next level and just realize, just park it where you're at. Gosh, there's so much you can do. And I actually tell my students that too, because sometimes people get real anxious to take it to the next level, take it to the next level. They're like, well, okay, I know 3 bar chord songs. What's next? I'm like, hang on. It's like,
Mm.
you know, there's so much music you can play with bar chords. You can play partial bar chords, so many different types of rhythms and funky 16th note strumming. And, you can learn how to get different tones on a Telecaster and a Tweed amp or a Les Paul and a Marshall amp. Like there's so much to explore. You don't always want to be pushing yourself to the next level,
Right.
because a lot of our favorite guitar players, they got to a certain level and they pretty much stayed there and made a career
Right.
out of it because they
Yeah.
realized they could be really successful just working within a certain skill set. Joe Walsh is one of my favorite guitar players. The guy only knows like 5 guitar licks. Actually, I mean, if you compare his technique, he has very good technique. His slide technique is very good. Of course, he was a great songwriter and stuff, but it's like there's something very simplistic, honestly, about what he does. Yet he, played on what's considered to be one of the most famous guitar solos of all time, Hotel California with Don Felder. But I just love that, like, he found his thing and he said, I'm going to make incredible music my whole life, just sticking at this level with this skill set.
Yeah.
And he wasn't always trying to push it to the next level, push it to the next level, because then he would have been trying to become something he wasn't.
Right. And I think like a lot of people don't realize that, that there's that phrase, jack of all trades. Well, a lot of people don't realize the second half of that phrase is master of none, meaning that like you are basically kind of half good at a lot of things, but you never really mastered, you didn't focus enough to master something. And I occasionally have to remind myself of that when I'm trying to like bite off more than I can chew. And it's like, okay, no, you need to focus on this thing and then get really good at it. And then you can move on from there if you want to, or branch out to a different instrument or something. But like, if you're trying to learn how to play the guitar and the piano and the mandolin and like all these other things at once, you're probably not going to make a lot of progress very quickly. And, you might do more harm than good if you're really all over the place. So I think
it's good to explore things, but at some point you got to make some like executive decisions. So at one point I was playing guitar and bass. I had a piano and I had a drum kit as well. And I just wanted to play all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, you know what? Like I'm spreading myself too thin here.
Right. Yeah.
And so I decided I will play guitar and I'll play bass. And I got rid of the piano and I got rid of the drum kit.
Mm-hmm.
I still think about how much I'd love to. Sometimes in the back of my mind, I'm like, maybe I should just take some piano lessons. And then I have to say, no, you know what? Like, you just stick with what you're doing, or drums.
Right.
Drums. But anyway, it was good for me to explore different things. But then at some point I thought, okay, I want to specialize. Some people might pick one instrument. I decided to play bass as well, play a lot of bass.
Right.
You can see some basses hanging back there. You know what, maybe to answer your question, I have been focusing a lot on bass playing. People aren't going to see much of it because my teaching materials don't really focus on that. But I just played a gig last weekend where I played bass, and I've just been looking for more opportunities to get out there.
I mean, bass is so much fun. Like I didn't get into playing it until the past 2 years or so. Like I mentioned, Richie is a bassist, and I never really thought of it as like a percussive instrument, but there's something really like, it's like it's when you play, or at least when I play bass, it's such a like rhythmic and so percussive, more than guitar, which is very kind of like noodly and like a little more fine detail when it comes to like picking and that sort of stuff. And there's something about the bass that like you can just, I feel like you can really get down with. And it's so much fun. And actually one of the videos that my most viral video is a video of me playing 46 and 2 by Tool, and also like playing the bass line and also singing, which was quite a challenge to learn how to do at the same time. But it's I don't know, it's just such a fun instrument, and I never really like paid much attention to it because I always just thought it was kind of like easier than guitar because there were less strings, but it's like it's its own beast, and it wasn't until I started to play it that I really gained an appreciation for how much fun it is.
Yeah, it's a different animal. And
Yeah.
sometimes when people hear that, oh, a guitar player that plays bass, they're like, no thanks, because a lot of guitar players just don't get it. It's like, you can physically pick it up and you can play some things, but bass is a different animal. It plays a different role in music. It's critical in how it establishes the groove and feel of a song. It's
Right.
critical on the interplay between the bass and the guitar and other instruments. And I find that fascinating. And because to me, like, music is kind of like a puzzle. And I
Mhm.
love the way that that the drums and the keys and the guitars and the bass, how they're all slightly different. And and I really like music where things are different. Sometimes you might have music where everyone's just strumming eighth notes, bass player and guitar player, dun 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 dun. That has its place sometimes, where that serves the music well. But whenever there's like a really interesting interplay where
Right.
everyone's doing something a little bit different that comes together that makes something cool like that, it just fascinates me. And, it's something that I can explore without needing to try to push myself on the next level on guitar, you know,
Right.
like trying to play faster on the guitar or something, or
Yeah.
yeah. And anyway, yes, I love bass. Maybe in the future I'll do more with bass, like with the content that I produce. Uh,
Yeah. I think it'd be cool to do like a bass focused episode or something.
yeah, I might. The problem is that the ratio of bassists to guitar players is literally 1,000 to 1, probably 3,000 to 1.
Yeah.
Which is another reason why I enjoyed playing bass, because it's like if you want a gig, if you're a solid bass player,
Yeah.
particularly if you're also like, I can sing a couple songs, I can do some harmonies, everyone is going to want you,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. They're hard to come by.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, you can play a lot. Um, uh, so anyway, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
That was
Well,
a very long-winded answer to your question. We really went off on some tangents there, but
that's okay. You know, it's all fun. All right. So on to some questions from my followers. So I think we talked a lot about already on how to overcome the plateau in learning guitar. Any other words of wisdom that come to mind?
you know, you got to explore different things, try to find good instruction.
Mhm.
If something isn't working, move on,
Yeah.
including some of my stuff. Look, if someone gets started with something that I have to offer and this just not clicking with them, well, I mean, you could always get help. Reach out to me for help. I do Zoom lessons too. Sometimes people just need a little one-on-one actual interaction, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, I got it," and they're on the right.
Yeah. I think having another person to not only like to bounce ideas off of, but to maybe even observe your playing or just to see what they're working on, I think can help you get out of a rut.
Yep.
Which is, you know, another reason why I think having a resource like your book or like your podcast or whatever the case may be, it will expose you to an idea that you may not be aware of, and that can kind of help you get out of wherever you currently are. If you're left to your own devices, you're probably just going to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you'll never get, you know,
Yeah.
that extra
It's
boost.
so helpful to, you know, expose yourself to some different ideas so you can experiment and explore your options and see what works. If you can find a good instructor, whether in person or online, like, you know, what I do, sometimes it's not something you have to commit to for. Sometimes people are like, well, I'm not ready to sign up and commit to weekly lessons. And I say, neither am I. But we could connect once every other month or something, and I can help you out. Or maybe you can find somewhere you could take lessons in person, and that can be kind of hit or miss too. Sometimes people
Yeah.
find instructors that just don't do it for them, but then sometimes you find someone and you just click with them, and they can be super helpful. So just don't give up. Explore your options,
Yeah.
and until you find something that works. Like anything else, you got to stick.
Yeah. And I think that like, you know, playing with someone else, or even just kind of having like you're talking about like essentially like a diagnostic lesson with somebody where you are coming in and saying, okay, well, can you do this, or do you know about this? And to you, it's going to be very obvious like where their gaps lie in their knowledge, but to them, they might have gotten so comfortable with whatever it is that they're already practicing that they're not even realizing that, oh, I've got this huge gap that is contributing to me feeling like I'm in this plateau. But I also think like at the end of the day, if you feel like you're not progressing and you're doing the same thing every single time, you probably should switch it up and, you know, do something different. Like you can't get results if you're just doing the same thing over and over and over again, you know?
Yeah, and I'll add to this. I probably should have said this earlier. Whenever I connect with someone who is like, man, I'm just not moving forward, I'm stuck in a rut, almost always I realize that they've gotten ahead of themselves and they have to back up.
Yeah.
And that could be several things. It could be like, man, I'm really struggling with these bar chords. And like, I'm like, can you hold your guitar like this for me for a second? And they'll turn their guitar up and I realize the strings are an inch off the fretboard. I'm like, do you know what a truss rod is or how to do a guitar setup? And they're like, I don't know what that is. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, look, I don't blame you for struggling with those bar chords because I couldn't play that guitar.
Yeah.
Let's back up and let's learn how to get a guitar in proper shape so
Mhm.
that it plays easily. Or sometimes, people are trying to learn solos or something, and if they're just sloppy and they're all over the place. They're like, my timing's off. How do I improve my timing? And come to find out, they couldn't even strum along with a basic song using cowboy chords or power chords. And I have to say, whoa, 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 hang on. You got to back up,
Mhm.
and like you got to learn how to play simpler things and develop your music skills so that you can then get to the point where you can play that David Gilmour solo, and you know when to come in and you know when to hit that one note, because now you've got a sense of rhythm and timing and everything.
Right.
Like you've gotten ahead of yourself. So
Yeah.
that's a big thing. Like people often need to back up and fill in gaps, and that's actually what's preventing them from moving forward.
Right. And I do think like it's great to have those kind of goal songs or, whatever, like riff or solo that you want to learn how to play. And you could like jump ahead and plunk it out and, kind of memorize it just from like a tabs perspective. But, you just can't get stuck in that same trap that I fell into where you don't do anything beyond that. You still have to go back and learn those basics. And then, you can have a little treat where you get to, play a fun solo or something as like a reward for doing that, or however you want to look at it. But that's at least was the case with me, is that especially when I started working with Richie, I was like, oh, I'm not nearly as good at this instrument as I thought I was. And it's not until you have to apply it in front of someone else that you become very aware that, there's something missing here. So having another person involved, even if they're not like a teacher, is always good.
Yeah, if you can find guitar playing friends or neighbors or other people that are playing, and absolutely, yeah.
Okay, next question. Let's see. I've got a couple here. This is an interesting one. What are your thoughts on the Hollywood dramatization of rock and roll gods? How do you feel about this sort of?
Oh gosh, I'm gonna be the best person to ask this question. I am so deeply into what I do and have been since I started playing guitar as a teenager, that I know so little about Hollywood and films and that sort of thing. Because I was the kid that's like, you guys are going to a movie, have fun. I'm going to go home and play my guitar for hours on end.
That's
So give me an example, maybe.
So the examples that they posted were like the recent like Bohemian Rhapsody, the Elton John movie, these kind of like biopic, but like overly, glamorized biographies of these people. And
I haven't seen either of those. I usually don't like movies like that because I realize that they're dramatized and they're
yeah,
that they're trying to make something. They're trying to make entertainment,
yeah,
and I do like reading biographies. I love learning, I loved watching that Beatles documentary, the one that was released last year.
yeah, the one that's like
Back.
a million years long, that one.
Yeah. Even though a lot of people didn't enjoy that because it was hard to watch at points because there really wasn't much happening. They were goofing off. They sounded terrible. Where are they going with this? I could see how your average viewer would
I think
be
that,
much more drawn into a Hollywood film than like seeing, but for me, like seeing like what really happened.
and that's what I was going to say is the target audience for that Beatles documentary is us. It's other musicians. I don't think that, I mean, maybe if you're like a super huge fan of the Beatles, but not a musician, it would be interesting to you, but it doesn't, it's not shiny. And a lot of people don't realize how much mundane, how many mundane hours go into actually making music. And it looks like that, a lot of it is just like sitting around, and then all of a sudden this masterpiece comes together, but it's not the fast-paced way that it is kind of dramatized in a lot of these movies. And that's what my response was going to be, is that I did see Bohemian Rhapsody. I think I'm second guessing myself. I'm pretty sure that's what the movie's called. But anyway, I saw that. I saw the Elton John one. And what I think kind of irritates me is that there's always this formula where, they show them before they're famous, and then it's like the next second they're playing stadiums. And there's a lot of additional steps that occur between them, starting like singing their very first song or whatever, whatever the case may be for that artist, to them selling out stadiums and going on tour. And I just feel like it further contributes to people having this like wildly blown out of proportion idea of like the amount of effort that goes into being an artist. And also like on the kind of financial side of it, one of the things that I've noticed is that people who are outside of the music industry tend to have this idea that musicians are all celebrities and all like very wealthy. And I recently posted a video where I was talking about streaming platforms and how they just don't pay artists very well, but that's a whole nother topic of conversation. And I got so many comments that were like, yeah, no thanks, I don't want to further enrich people. And I'm like, I am struggling to like make $1, with my music. So, I think there's this attitude that everyone who's in the music industry or everyone who has a song out on Spotify is like a millionaire, and it could not be further than the truth. And so I think
the vast majority of people are broke and they're working other jobs just to support their passion,
Yeah.
It's fascinating when you even learn about very famous bands from the past who became very huge stars and extremely wealthy. But it's like, but when they were recording what is now some of their most iconic music, like they were still they had enough, money to put gas in the van to drive to the next town and play the next show. Like it even took a while before they kind of struck it rich. So yeah, I'm usually just not a fan of those Hollywood takes on that sort of stuff. I love watching documentaries. Like I really want to know like what really happened, what was someone really like, and a good documentary that's got some good like behind the scenes footage, like real stuff. Like that's what I like. It's hard for me to watch somebody else try to tell me what Elton John was like or what. Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
I mean, I think they're fun. They can be entertaining. Like I watched both of those movies and had a great time, but I also was like, this is incredibly unrealistic. You've skipped several steps in what it took for them to get to this place.
Yeah.
And, it's not actually them. It's them being portrayed by actors, and, a lot of stuff is overly dramatized, and they skip a lot of things as well. A lot of the negative sides of the music industry and being that exposed. So, I think they're fun, but I don't think anyone should take them as like accurate depictions, accurate historical films,
Yeah.
So how are we doing? Do you have time
Hey,
for
if we
another?
got some more questions, let's knock them out.
All right. This one is back to playing guitar, but this person wanted to know, how do you know when to commit to an idea? Like maybe you're recording a lick. How do you know that's the one?
How do you know that's the one? So I'm not a songwriter, but I do like to be creative and make up music. And also, like, even if you're not recording, like, even if you're just playing in a cover band or something, like, if you're any good at it, there's always some amount of creativity where you have to, you're not always copying songs note for note. So you have to figure out, how can I recreate this song? Gosh, there's 6 guitar tracks, but it's just me and another guitar player, or how am I going to play this solo? So there's always some amount of creativity, and you might put your own spin on things. I made up the instrumental track that is typically heard at the beginning of my podcast. And when I, on the rare occasion when I have the opportunity to sit down and be creative like that, for me, it's just getting a lot of ideas out and recording them, and then listening back, and then just I might start with a riff and I think this is a cool riff. And then I start building around it. What would the bass do? What would the chords be? What's the melody going to be? And then at some point I'll be like, this is coming together and I like the way this sounds, but I don't want that original riff in there anymore. Like, I'm going to take that out. Like the melody that I came up with in the bass now, this is something cool, even better than that riff. So sometimes, you just have to sit there and experiment with it. And that's usually what I do. I record a bunch of tracks, a bunch of ideas. I'm, of course, drawing on my brain that's full of all these ideas. It's really easy for me to start with a piece of music and understand like things that I could do. So I'll put them all in there, and then I go through and like, well, let me mute that guitar, and what if we bring this guitar up? And I'm trying to figure out like how to sculpt it, and I just listen back and I say, this sounds good, or that doesn't sound good. And so hopefully somewhere in that process, that's what happened with the instrumental. I'll use that instrumental track that most people are going to hear the podcast. There's several guitars in there. If you listen to the whole thing, I just kind of I dragged it out, and there's times when I muted some tracks and then I brought them back in, or I added some effects on it, just so you still had kind of the same basic track, but it was just kind of morphing and changing, so it wasn't the same thing over and over. But yeah, I just loaded up tracks and just kept adding parts and parts and parts and trying to play off different parts. And then it was going through and then just saying, which parts do I like? Which parts do I like together? Which ones do I want to eliminate, get rid of? Or sometimes I recorded that in Logic. So I used some of the Logic, the plug-in amp sounds. Effects. And that was kind of neat too, because you can just kind of go through and listen to the track with some different sounds and effects. And sometimes I was like, yeah, this track just isn't doing it for me. And then all of a sudden I put a delay on it and I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Oh, that's really cool now. That fits in the mix. And so I decided that, okay, I'm gonna keep that. So that's what I do. How about you?
Sometimes I feel like the sound itself informs how you're like what's going to come out of it melodically. Like I have a Kemper. I think you have a Kemper as well. And sometimes I will, if I'm not feeling particularly inspired, I will just like scroll through a bunch of the sound presets and find some kind of, amp that I like, some kind of effects rig that I like. And just that one sound, I'll be like, oh, I know exactly where I'm going to go with this. But when I'm songwriting, I will usually the ideas come really quickly, but I will always try to challenge myself to like not fall into the same habits that I may have. So if I always have a habit of resolving, on, I don't know, the one or something, then I'm like, okay, well, what if I had this in a different direction? And I'll kind of iterate through a couple different variants of that melody or that riff. And I may ultimately decide, you know what, I like the original idea the best, but I usually try and challenge myself to come up with something different to see if maybe I like that better. And sometimes I do. The other thing that I like to do, well, I don't like to do it, but the other thing that's very effective is having someone else listen to your track. So like if I'm in the middle of producing something and like I'll have Richie come in and listen to what I've got so far. We're like actively in this process right now, working on a track. And, I may think like, oh, this is so great. Like, I can't wait for people to hear it. And then just the act of having another person in the room listening to it, it will sound very different to you. And right away you'll identify like, oh, I need to change that, or I need to add something here. So like, once again, having another person in the room really kind of brings into focus what may still need work. But it will also help you feel really confident about the parts of your music that are finished, because you'll know like, oh, I like this, like, and they're hearing it and I still like it, type of situation. So I think that's also a great way to kind of like throw your songs into focus, if you're at that stage. But more often than not, I would say, just try and get your ideas out. And then if you feel like they're a little contrived or kind of like cliche, then challenge yourself to maybe go in a different direction than you would. But, if it sounds good, it is good. So just go with it. If it doesn't sound good to you yet, then you're not done.
Yep. Yeah, you just keep working on it. You keep adding parts, taking parts away, rearrange it, and hopefully something good comes out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. You got some more questions?
I think we may be done. Let me just double check.
My notes as well.
I did get one question about songwriting, and just how do you actually come up with structure. So this person had said that they, that they come up with ideas, but when it comes to actually like structuring them into a song, that's where they get kind of stuck. And my response would just be to, of course, listen to as much music as you can, but do it actively and try to identify like, okay, what is the structure in these songs? Not necessarily so you can copy it directly, but to kind of build up this repertoire of options, at least, that you can either follow or deviate from. But doing that sort of active listening where you are listening to each instrument in a song and you're figuring out like how they're changing throughout the progression, what sounds are they using, what effects are they using, how is it accenting the vocalist if there is one. Like those are all things to pay really close attention to. And that I do this frequently when I go back and listen to artists that inspire my music. Some of the artists that kind of influence me are artists like Portishead and Massive Attack, and even grunge bands like Nirvana. There's everything in kind of like the 90s, early 2000s category, like I said. But I'll go back and listen and see how do they structure these songs that are so dear to me that they've released. And not with the intention to copy it or anything, but you always find some sort of like point of inspiration when you're listening to something like that. And there's always a different approach that you might not have thought about that you can kind of implement in your own little way. So, I think the other thing is that you just kind of have to you have to let your ideas come out, even if they're not good. So sometimes when I'm writing a song, like I will just write it and I'm like, I don't like this at all, but I need to like get this one out so I can move on to the next one. You kind of have to have a bunch of like bad songs under your belt before you can start writing, if maybe 10% of them are going to be good. So trying not to be as judgmental with whether or not this song that you're actively writing is going to be like the end all be all of songs, but to just kind of let it take itself where it's going to go. And then you either like it or you don't like it. And maybe you revisit it later if you get stuck. And, sometimes I'll get stuck on a song and I will leave it for months and then I'll pick it back up later. And I'm like, oh, I know exactly what changes I want to make. So there's a bit of a balance there as well.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate what you said about like, go listen to some songs, actively listen to them, work them out, learn them. I think one of the reasons why some aspiring songwriters really are lacking ideas is because they're really lacking much of a repertoire. They just
Right.
haven't really played much music,
Mm-hmm.
So the more music you play, then the more ideas you'll have, the more you'll understand how songs go together and how they're typically structured.
Yeah. And outside of it doesn't have to be in your genre either. In fact, it's great to listen to like a huge breadth of music in addition to, the niche that you're trying to write in. You should listen to things that are the complete opposite of what you would normally listen to, because you'll learn something from that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it all comes back to songs. I sound like a broken record on many of my podcasts because the answer to almost everything is learn songs.
It must be true.
If I can't come up with good ideas to write my own songs, what should I do? Learn songs. What if I can't play very well? What should I do? Learn songs. I'm not able to come up with any good melodic solos. What should I do? Learn songs, And I guess we're coming back full circle here because throughout fretboard theory, one of the things that I do is I'm constantly referencing familiar songs. I don't just say, here's a scale pattern. I say, here's a scale pattern. And here's a dozen songs that all open up with a famous guitar riff that uses that scale pattern. Of course, I hope that the reader would learn that pattern, but then they would also take some time to go learn some of those riffs so they can see, oh, I see how this gets turned into music. I see how this gets used. So that's really the best way to learn about songs, songwriting, music, playing music is to learn a bunch of songs, analyze them, have some sort of understanding of what you're doing, is instead of just memorizing the tablature.
And that's
Like,
what I was going to say is that, like, for whatever reason, I didn't get that second part of wisdom, which is like, don't just learn the songs, actually understand the songs. That's what I missed in my initial years of guitar practice, is that I was like, okay, great, I'm learning a bunch of songs. It's still not clicking, like I can play all of these complex riffs and I can sing them at the same time, and that's all, but I still have no idea what I'm doing. And so not only is it learning the songs, but it's actually like paying attention at least to what key you're in, especially if you're like a really beginner guitarist. And it may be overwhelming to try and think about every single note that you're playing. My advice, at least, would be, at minimum, know what key you're in, because you'll start to, as you learn more songs, you're like, oh, these are all in E minor. And you start to kind of figure out like where you are on the fretboard as you're playing these songs that are all in the same key. And that's where, at least for me, things really started to click, is when I was paying attention to what I was playing rather than just memorizing it.
yeah, I mean, we memorize to get started. That's what I recommend for beginners. But then once you have a decent repertoire of songs and you've developed your general playing skills, then it really does become helpful to start thinking more about what you're doing. And actually, you won't really be able to make good use of theory until you have developed general playing skills and you have a pretty decent repertoire. If you're learning your very first song and you're trying to understand the key, it might be hard for you to really wrap your mind around that concept. But if you know dozens of songs, then you can go through and say, well, do you see how these songs are G, C, D, E minor, and here's another one, G, C, D, E minor, and here's another one, G, C, D, E minor. These are all in the same key. And you see how this one is A, D, E, and F sharp minor, and so are these other. This is the same movement in another key. Like, if you have enough repertoire and playing experience, then it actually becomes easier for you to understand why this theory stuff is so useful. So I usually tell beginners, learn a bunch of stuff, and then you can understand it. Well, this has been fantastic. I am so glad that we got connected here. And you've been a fantastic guest, and I know that I'm going to get lots of great feedback from this, and people are probably going to want to have you back and ask more questions. Who knows? We'll see.
I could talk about guitar and music and a ton of topics for a very, very long time. So I'm really happy that we got the chance to connect. Social media is a crazy place, but sometimes really cool things happen. And I was so excited when I got your email. So thank you so much for reaching out to me.
And I was equally as excited when people are like, hey, this girl's talk, isn't this your book? And actually I first heard about it. My daughter, who's 19, texted me the video, and she's not even on TikTok. I'm like, what? How did you hear about this? She's like, somebody else, a friend of mine, another state, said, isn't this your dad? Sent it to her. And and then since then, like, I ran into other people and they're like, so I saw a video, like, even some people I know, they're like, I didn't realize you authored a book. I'm like, well, what do you think I do all day? I've authored like 7 books.
That's so cool.
It was, I mean, I was delighted, I mean, I do come across that a lot. You can search me and I'm all over the internet, but that video really took off, and that was really neat, and that was really special. Well,
I hope that your book sales went up. I like to imagine that you were just like, one day there was like a spike and you're like, what's going on? But I don't know if that's really
I actually had to go back and look at some of the reports. And there was a spike. Like, I didn't notice it initially, but I thought, well, wait a minute, let me see if so I appreciate that.
That's
so
great.
Really, maybe I have one more question for you. I am not on TikTok.
Yes.
for this all
And
happen?
I was going to
Do I
say,
need to be on TikTok?
well, I
What's
think that
the age limit? Are they not gonna allow me in there because I'm beginning to get gray hair?
contrary to popular belief, it is not just for Gen Z. And, I was really resistant to the idea of getting on there. But as a musician, it's easily the most effective platform these days because it is so audio dominant, and Instagram is trying to catch up because there's been a lot of changes on Instagram recently to basically mimic TikTok. But I think that a lot of people actually go to TikTok to learn about things now. It's not just dance videos. There's a lot of really awesome, informative content. People of all ages have accounts, and I think that you would do really, really well. Just making little short videos about the guitar or whatever it is that you want to talk about. I think people
All
would
right.
eat it up.
I'm on TikTok here. Desi's gonna set up a TikTok account right now, happening here live during this podcast, and I'm gonna follow you.
Oh my gosh, I love this.
Do this right now. Where's my phone? All right.
I mean, you could probably even just film yourself as you're doing your podcasts and break those into, little clips for a TikTok, or do like little bite-sized lessons. The shorter generally, the better. People's attention spans are kind of short these days, but yeah, I think it would be a great platform for you. And tons of people, like I said, have commented on that video saying that they got your book and
They're
that
probably all looking for me like, oh, I'm gonna follow this guy on TikTok.
yeah, well, I was looking for you when I made that video, and I was like, oh, I should tag him, but then you weren't there. But here we are, so it's all good.
Okay, username Desi Cerna Guitar. Let's make sure I spelled that right. Cerna Guitar. I'm signing up for TikTok.
That's awesome. Well, I'm sure that you will take off right away because tons of people already know your name and are looking for, some more instruction. So I think it's a great place to be.
Notification about this, and then I need to make sure I'm following you.
Yes, that would be awesome. I'll follow you back.
Okay, well, does it recognize my account yet? It does. There, you're gonna get a message saying that you're followed by Desi Cerna Guitar. I haven't even uploaded a picture yet. Awesome. Well, I'm excited about following you and your content. I think what you do is great, and you've built a great following. And we'll see. I might start posting on this platform, and we'll see. We'll see where I go with it. But I am so glad that we got to connect here and do this. And thanks again for such a great review. And hey, we need to keep in touch.
You're very welcome. And thank you for writing such an awesome book. It has seriously helped me, and I'm still working through it again for the second time. So I'm going to squeeze out as much knowledge as I possibly can from that series. So thank you.